In 1970, Don Willans led the reconnaissance for a British climb on Mount Annapurna.
I was with Mike Thompson and two Sherpas. These are men who really understand the mountains, but take life very seriously.
Yeti, good one.
Very bad for you.
Why?
No good. No good. Yeti.
We were moving through deep snow, and it was fairly exhausting. The evening we set up base, we just put our packs down to make camp, when there was a commotion at the back of me. I turned round just in time to see something drop out of sight behind the ridge. But night was coming, so I put it to the back of my mind. I had to get up. I had this strange feeling that if this creature was still around, it would show itself. It was daylight practically. The moon was so bright, and I saw a dark patch in the shadows. I definitely saw it move, and I got the impression it was an ape-like creature. I watched it for almost 10 minutes. Then, as if it knew it was being watched, it dropped out of sight.
In the book, that is the book of known animals, there are just 4 great apes: gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans and man. And the remarkable thing is that we humans are so similar to the others. In fact, we share 98% of our genes with chimpanzees. So maybe it's not too surprising that there are so many other legends of hominid primates in cultures all around the world. Stories of big hairy monsters, wild men, that sort of thing. But then why are these legends so common, and why do we like to believe in them? And at the end of the 20th century, could there really be a close living relative of ours out there in the wild, as yet unknown to science? I've come here to Nepal because probably the most famous of all those legends, that of the abominable snowman or the Yeti, is deeply ingrained in the culture here. And its popularity has spread ever since Western mountaineers first brought back tales of their encounters with these animals high in the Himalayas. It feels strange setting off in search of a myth, but then I haven't come here to see a Yeti. My quest is to investigate the possibility of its existence in purely biological terms, and that means a trek high into Sherpa country.
Johnny Ho.
Johnny Ho.
Yeah, it means let us go.
Let us go.
Yeah.
So we've got to start sometime.
So,
okay.
Johnny Ho.
The culture here is so different. There's a real sense of spiritual harmony with nature and the landscape. The head porter told me that the Yeti represents a very potent force in the mountains, a destructive force. No, I'm no athlete. I don't work out in the gym 3 times a week. But I'm only 36. I've never smoked and I'm not overweight. But at this altitude, I'm really struggling. I'm up in the clouds and the Sherpas are probably already in the tea house. Oh, yeah, very funny. Johnny Ho, Johnny Ho. By the time I'd reached Namche Bazaar at 13,000 feet, that's over 4,000 meters, I needed to stop and acclimatise. Lapka Norbu is one of the village elders, renowned for his wisdom. It was a perfect opportunity to find out how seriously the locals take the Yeti as an animal. So you think they're definitely a real animal?
I think so. But it's a rare animal, but that's why it's very hard. Yeah. People believe there are two kinds of Yeti. One Yeti which is more rare, which mostly look for man. But the other Yeti mostly eats animal.
Only eats animals?
Animals, yeah.
So do most of the people here then actually fear Yetis? They're afraid of them, are they?
Mm-hmm.
Traditional Sherpa paintings are pictograms, two-dimensional maps of the fields, houses, even the number of yaks each family owns. As there are no roads up here, they show the routes between each place. And typically, peering down from the peaks, there are Yetis. So how often do local people encounter these animals? Well, there is one extraordinary story. In 1974, Lapka Doma said she was brutally attacked by one.
When I was 14 years old, we grazed our yaks at Machermo, and that's where it happened. I turned, and there was a black figure just behind me. It threw me into the river. When I came out of the river, I realized my hair had been pulled out.
She was found by her brother.
The yaks had been killed. When wolves or snow leopards attack cattle, they make a lot of wounds. But these had only teeth marks, yet all the flesh had been eaten from inside. I found a Yeti footprint in the sand. It was narrow at the heel, and the toes were long and spread out.
It's a powerful story, but it's far too late to provide tangible biological evidence. But for the Yeti to exist now, it must have a history. Before I'd left Kathmandu, I met George Schaller, a brilliant field naturalist who knows the Himalayas well, and he had a view on the history of the Yeti.
There's no question that during the Pleistocene, based on fossils found in China and Vietnam and so forth, a gigantic ape lived in the region. Nobody's sure exactly what it lived on, but most likely lived on a combination of meat and vegetable matter.
This is Gigantopithecus. It might have lived alongside humans. So, in a storytelling culture that stretches so far back, maybe the Yeti legends are based on fact. But what about now? Could a whole population of these apes remain hidden? Well, George has spent years here, tracking one of the most elusive animals on Earth, the snow leopard.
The snow leopard lives in the high mountains where it can see a person approaching miles away. And it can crouch down and you can walk within a few feet of it and never see it. Or it moves off quietly like a cloud shadow, like a wisp of smoke.
Even local naturalists only glimpse these animals once every couple of years. So could it be that the Yeti is just as shy?
I think the chances are extremely small that another great ape is likely to be found. On the other hand, it's very difficult to prove something doesn't exist. I think there's still a faint chance that something might exist, something unexplained, obviously is still there.
If anything is here, it's got to be in the forest, because that's the only place it could remain hidden, and more importantly, the only place it could find any food. In summer, this forest is quite a pleasant environment, given the limited diversity of plants. But a primate needs a constant food supply, so the key test is the winter. Now, everything edible has shriveled and died, and the few species of animal that do live here have either moved lower down or hibernated. In effect, this larder is empty. If a hidden population of hominid-type animals has evolved to live here, then it's living in some of the harshest conditions that any primate possibly could. But okay, if the Yeti has overcome these obstacles of physiology, metabolism and ecology, what's the evidence for its existence? Strangely, the documented evidence comes from up here, above the tree line, in the form of footprints. A number of explorers this century, including Don Willens, have discovered tracks. They often appear two-footed, but to save energy, when they walk through snow, four-footed animals, like bears, will plant their hind feet in the prints of their forefeet. And that leaves a track like an upright ape's, a track like mine. But there's another very serious problem. The incredible shortage of oxygen up here often makes it difficult for unaccustomed Westerners to make reasoned conclusions about anything they see. Probably the most famous set of footprints of all were those taken by Shipton, published in 1951. Just look at these footprints. They're pretty convincing. What's really neat about them is that they led in a trail which went for over a mile. Now the thing is, Shipton never admitted it, but it was widely thought to be a hoax. Now there is a problem with footprints left in snow, and it's known as the freeze-thaw phenomena. And basically, when an impression is left in snow, and then it thaws out, probably during the daytime when the sun shines, and then refreezes again at night, the whole footprint can change shape. The only evidence that's going to convince anyone else, especially scientists, is a body, skin and bones. So thankfully, Yetis are so revered up here that some of the monasteries have relics which are alleged to be pieces of Yeti. It was said that the Tengboche monastery had the bones of a Yeti hand. It was stolen. And unfortunately, a fire at the monastery at Pangboche destroyed another relic. That leaves the monastery here at Kumjung, which houses the only remaining Yeti artefact in the whole region. And it's one of the Sherpa religion's most revered relics, and it's meant to be a Yeti scalp. Thank you. So, did this really come from a real animal, from a real Yeti?
Yes, it is Yeti. Totally different from a human skull.
To me, it looks like a very poor fake. It's got an obvious seam, and more importantly, the hair is growing up towards the crown, and that just isn't natural. And in the 60s, the most famous of all Himalayan mountaineers, Sir Edmund Hillary, took this scalp back to the west for testing. The verdict, Serau, a Himalayan goat antelope. But they just checked the hairs under a microscope. Now we have infallible DNA testing. So I needed to meet with Tenzing, head of the village committee. I'd like to take just one hair from this Yeti scalp to test using the latest scientific techniques, which would determine once and for all, with no doubt, whether this comes from a known species of animal or a species which is yet unknown to science. So can I have just one hair, just one?
Sorry. Because I don't care whether the Western people are saying buffalo skin or whatever skin. But this is, we do believe this Yeti scalp, and so let them say whatever it is.
I respect your passion. I'll leave you with all of your hairs.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the relics don't prove anything biological, and the Sherpas aren't concerned either way. For them, the Yeti is a symbol, and that's very obvious at their annual festival, the Dumji. The purpose of the festival is to exorcise those evil forces which threaten the well-being of the community. During the ceremony, the sacred scalp is worn by a man. Once he has placed it on his head, he represents the spirit of the Yeti, and that's a bad spirit, sent by the gods to punish humans for their misdeeds. You know, it struck me that what I was witnessing is played out in every culture in the world, a battle of good against evil, where people are reassured by the suppression of dark forces. Eventually, the Yeti is driven out of the village, and those bad spirits are banished by the symbolic burning of an effigy. So I suppose, in a way, the Yeti is a bogeyman in Sherpa culture, and long may it live. I don't believe a real animal exists, but as George Schaller said, it can be a lot harder to prove that an animal doesn't exist than to gather evidence that it does. But here, in the forest of Sumatra, 8,000 kilometres to the south, there's another less well-known ape-man legend. So could this be the sign that we're not alone? It's a print attributed to Orang Pendek, the short man, and it certainly excited leading primate scientist David Chivers.
The footprints are amazing, and the mixture of ape and human features blended together. It's retained some of the grasping abilities of the apes, but also got a sort of flat-footed version of the human foot. And this enables it to walk upright.
There's a team funded by Fauna and Flora International, and they're out here looking for this animal. They're searching in an extraordinary place called Karinchi Sablat. Now, we don't know much about this forest, but the one thing we do know is that it's not a barren snow desert like the Himalayas.
The forests of Southeast Asia, particularly Sumatra, are so complex and diverse, and still extensive, that it's quite feasible that there's a species of ape that's eluded discovery.
But it has been seen. Team member Debbie Marta first glimpsed the animal in 1993.
It walked straight across the valley in front of me, 30 metres away. So close and so clear. Didn't expect to see it. Certainly didn't expect to see it that clearly. And just walking between these two trees, vegetation to about hip level, this gorgeous, graceful, very strongly built primate, big ape, walking out of a legend and into broad daylight lit up by the sun. And the disbelief of seeing this thing. And if I'd seen it concealed in undergrowth, I could have said, well, I saw something. But I didn't see something. I saw an orang pendek walk across the valley, just 30 metres away from me.
Debbie's main task is to follow up sightings and encounters, which means effective liaison with locals. Our first stop is a tiny village on the edge of the forest, because over the years, farmers here have had clear, unobstructed sightings in their fields. They could identify the hair colour and were convinced of what they saw.
Bilang saya orang hutan, tetapi orang panda.
Nggak nampak ya?
They consistently describe the walking action. And this local artist, Pak Jassa, drew these pictures after collating some of the farmers' descriptions.
It's not bad at all, particularly the back of the head. It's not bad. I've not seen the animal so close that I could go off and say, wow, amazing, this is a photo fit.
But there are also just a few people left who actually share the habitat of this ex-creature. The modern world has all but destroyed the orang kubu. In this tribe, only 30 remain. They're incredibly secretive, difficult to meet. But Debbie has their confidence. Without question, they're our best way of finding out what lives in this forest.
Saya mau Bapak Arau ketemu sama kawan saya. Ini Pak Chris di mana?
Hello. Hello.
Dan dia dari Inggris datang dari jauh ketemu sama kami.
One of the tribe, Pak Buyang, had a recent encounter with the orang pendek.
Iya, panjang.
Panjang di mana? Panjang di badan sini atau?
It was the same color all over.
Ada yang lebih panjang atau yang lebih pendek?
Enggak, sama.
Its face was covered in hair, like a bear's.
Muka bentuknya apa? Atau tidak lihat?
Mukanya tuh seperti.
But it wasn't a bear. We all know bears.
Could he have got it wrong?
No, it was a man of the forest.
OK, they know it's here, but they couldn't show me one. But then there are a few British mammals, otters in England, pine martens in Scotland, that I wouldn't be able to show them. The fact is that gathering good scientific evidence here is incredibly tough. Basically, it's the environment, the heat, the wet and the mud. In the last 4 years, the team have found footprints in lots of different locations, often in long, continuous tracks, and they all have the features of upright walking that so excited David Chivers. The team are convinced that they're pretty conclusive evidence.
You can actually see the movement of the foot. You've got the toes, 1, 2, 3, 4 toes. This is a large primate, and its foot doesn't approximate in any way to any other primate that's known in these forests.
The one thing, short of a dead body, that would prove there's a new species here is DNA. But its collection requires absolute sterility. In these conditions, that's quite unimaginable.
Well, what we're looking for is DNA from the gut wall of the animal, which we can then get analysed.
So far, none of the lab results have proved positive. And as for finding a body, there's virtually no chance. When something dies, it can disappear overnight. In this heat and moisture, it becomes an insect and fungus banquet, and then porcupines eat the bones. Nevertheless, to David Chivers, the search is still worthwhile.
What really excited me was reading Deborah's reports, and it sent shivers down your spine. It was so uncanny, and given the frequency of these sightings, there's got to be something out there that is incredible. Will make a real tremendous discovery. A new ape for a new millennium.
A new ape for a new millennium. That would be sensational. But what are the chances, really? Well, those footprints are inexplicable. They've got all the characteristics of a bipedal ape. But could it be a subspecies of a known primate? What about orangutan? They live in other parts of Southeast Asia. They live up in the trees, but it's not a physical impossibility for one to walk upright. They can waddle along on 2 feet. So could a new, related species have evolved to walk more efficiently? Strangely, I remember seeing footprints like the orang pendeks before. This is an ex-circus chimp that's been trained to walk very ably. It's weird, isn't it, watching another ape walking? It's, well, it's scary. It's as if the bogeyman is real after all. And maybe that's the root of our fascination in these legends. These animals are close to us. Too close to us. They're almost human. But that footage is also evidence. Apes can walk upright, just like Debbie and the locals have described. But is it out there? How is anyone going to prove it exists? Short of the body or bones that science craves, a good clear photograph would be the next best thing. But just like everything here, it's not easy. A Sumatran forest is probably one of the trickiest places to photograph wildlife in the world. Even state-of-the-art, lightweight autofocus equipment isn't going to get you a picture unless you're extremely lucky. And it's a result, not luck, that's needed here. But whilst to date Debbie has drawn a blank, the team photographer, Jeremy Holden, has made remarkable progress.
This is how we're doing it. This is how we're getting the pictures. Basically, we're just using a off-the-shelf infrared unit here, fitted onto an ordinary 35mm compact camera, which has been specially adapted to fire when the infrared beam here is broken by anything passing along the trail.
It's a simple technique, producing startling results.
This one, for instance, is a picture of a Sumatran tiger, very seldom seen and very rarely photographed.
Yeah. Fantastic, fantastic.
This was Project First. It's a melanistic golden cat.
And again, an animal which you don't see very often, I presume.
Well, I did actually manage to see this one, but only once. But this animal, the Sumatran tapir, the size of a buffalo, black and white, extremely conspicuous and not very intelligent, but yet I've never have seen one.
And yet here it is in full colour.
This is something that's even rarer, as the cloudy leopard.
Look at that. But the most extraordinary was a bird.
This one here, very, very poor quality picture, but it just shows what can be done. This is a giant pitta, which is something that hadn't been recorded in the national park ever, and in fact hadn't been recorded in Sumatra for over 100 years.
Wow, wow, look at that. This is a picture of an animal that one could reasonably call extinct. So could this technique record another, which supposedly doesn't exist?
If we're going to get a picture of Orang Pendek, if we're going to prove it exists, this is the way we're going to do it.
And you know, I believe him. I think if there's anyone on the planet who's going to discover an animal that's on the brink of our knowledge, Jeremy could be the one to do it. Now, I have to admit, I've found little more evidence for Orang Pendek than for the Yeti, but there's a dramatic difference in their viability. Nepal is cold and barren, whereas this Sumatran rainforest is an incredibly fertile resource. If as a rational scientist I could afford to pin hope anywhere, this is where I'd stick my pin. Surely here is our best chance of an X-creature. Thousands of square miles of the world's richest and most productive forest, an unexplored wilderness, and a place where it's incredibly easy for an animal to hide. It's a place where an animal can leave traces but no tracks, where a dead animal can be skin and bones one minute and gone the next. And yet it's the same place that a small team of people have already identified animals that aren't meant to be here. So maybe tomorrow, maybe next month or next year, somewhere out there in the mist, a flash gun will go pop in the gloom, and Orang Pendek will go from being an X-creature to the next creature.
Flippers and oxygen lying at the ready next week on BBC One when Chris Packham attempts to track down the giant squid, better known to some as the alien in the abyss.